Okay, Michael, we're ready to get started.
Good morning and welcome, everyone. Buenos dias a todos y a todas.
Good morning, all.
Honored and privileged to partner today with the International Planned Parenthood Federation, the Western Hemisphere Division, and also the Embassy of Argentina in Washington, D.C., to co-host this important session on the road to legal abortion in Argentina. I'm deeply grateful to my friend Jorge Arguello, Argentina's distinguished ambassador to the United States, as well as to Giselle Carino, the CEO of International Planned Parenthood, for their collaboration and their confianza. For nearly 4 decades, the dialogue has engaged our diverse network of global leaders to advance democratic governance, prosperity, and social equity in Latin America and the Caribbean. Our purpose has been to shape the debate, the policy debate, generate ideas and solutions that are practical and realistic, and enhance collaboration within the Americas to address hemispheric challenges and opportunities. The dialogue's work on reproductive rights stems from our commitment to advancing democracy, human rights, and citizenship in our hemisphere. It builds on more than 25 years of research, analysis, and advocacy on the issues of concern to women. Since the first summit of the Americas in 1994, the dialogue has convened women leaders and monitored progress in achieving positions of leadership in the realm of electoral politics, the judiciary, international organizations, and in corporate management. In the early 2000s, the dialogue co-sponsored the Women's Leadership Conference of the Americas, a hemispheric network of 100 prominent women leaders that sought to promote women into positions of leadership and prove the effectiveness of women already in positions of power. Please allow me to recognize Joan Caivano's truly pioneering effort on these issues. Very much in line with this history and our track record, our aim today is to put the reproductive rights squarely on the policy agenda. We hope to make policymakers more aware of the consequences of limited access to contraception, inadequate sex education, and total bans on abortion. The disproportionate suffering of women during the global COVID pandemic is just another example of the threats to women's health that result from failed public policies. Today's discussion will explore the political mobilization and remarkable story that led to the historic vote in the Argentine Senate to legalize abortion, a landmark in the advancement of human rights, of women's rights in Latin America. This vote was the culmination of a process that spanned some 15 years and involved multiple actors, from government officials and parliamentarians to feminists, academics, and activists. We will also analyze the implications of what is arguably a watershed political moment in Argentina and across the region. Are there relevant lessons for other countries in building political mobilization to advance women's rights, broadly defined and also encompassing sexual and reproductive health and rights? Finally, I want to thank Dialogue Program Associate Sofia Landinde for her tireless and expert work to help bring this event to fruition. Let me also commend to all of you, Sofia's superb blog, which is a preview for this event, After Argentina's Green Wave, Assessing Abortion Rights in Latin America. You can find that blog on the Dialogue's website. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce our partner and the moderator of today's event, Giselle Carino. Giselle has an impressive background and is a widely recognized leading authority on sexual and reproductive health and rights. She is the CEO for the International Planned Parenthood Federation of the Western Hemisphere Division, where she leads a network of some 45 autonomous partners engaged in this issue. Gisela has been at IPPF for 2 decades. Before that, she worked for the Inter-American Parliamentary Group on Population and Development, where she developed policy briefings, proposed regulations, and trained Latin American and Caribbean members of Parliament and other policymakers on sexual and reproductive health and rights. Gisela received a Bachelor of Arts degree in Political Science in Argentina and has a Master master's degree in public administration from New York University. Before turning the mic over to Gisela, I want to remind our audience members to submit questions through the Q&A feature in Zoom and at the bottom of your screen, or by emailing meetings@thedialogue.org. You can follow the conversation on Twitter by using the hashtag #LegalAbortionArgentina. We also have simultaneous interpretation available for this webinar. You can change your language channel by clicking the interpretation icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and you can choose between English, Spanish, or the original audio. And with that background, I look forward to a very, very stimulating discussion, and let me turn it over to Gisela.
Gracias, Michael. Muchísimas gracias por tu
Thank
presencia.
you very much, Michael. Thank you very much for your introduction, and thank you to the Inter-American Dialogue and the co-sponsor, the Embassy of Argentina, and the ambassador. For us, it's a great privilege and a pleasure to be with you on this occasion. As Michael said, we represent a network of feminist organizations that work in Latin America and the Caribbean. We have spent 70 years in the battle for sexual and reproductive rights, so it's a unique moment to learn from our colleagues in Argentina and understand how this should influence and inspire other processes and marches in the regions of the world. Without any further ado, I now would like to introduce the panelists. It's a privilege to have them here and hear them. I will first introduce Vilma Ibarra. Vilma is the Legal and Technical Secretary of the Nation of Argentina. She is an attorney, prosecutor, and a politician in Argentina. She's had several positions as senator and deputy for the city of Buenos Aires. Thank you very much for being with us today, Vilma. Our next panelist is Marta Alanis, who is the founder of Catholics for Choice in Argentina. She's a member of the National Campaign for the Right to Legal, Free, and Safe Abortion. And legend says that Marta is the one that created the legend of the green handkerchief. She'll talk to us about it, which is a symbol not only in Argentina now, but throughout the region for this struggle. Thank you for being with us also, Marta. We also have Ana Cristina Gonzalez, who is the founder of the medical group for the right to choose in Colombia. And she's the founder of the Roundtable for the Life and Health of Women. She is the professor at the medical school in the University of Los Andes in Bogota, and she is here representing the movement Just Cause, Causa Justa. She'll tell us about it. And finally, the last panelist is Monica de Bolle, who's now a senior researcher at the Peterson Institute for International Economics and member of the Dialogue. She's from Brazil, and it's a pleasure to have you here to give us your perspective. And finally, I would like to introduce Ambassador Arguello, whom I am very grateful to for co-sponsoring this event. It has been a pleasure to work with you, Ambassador. Ambassador is an attorney and a politician. On the 6th of February 2020, he became the Argentine ambassador to the United States of America. In addition, the ambassador was a legislator for the city of Buenos Aires and elected twice as a national deputy. He's had several other diplomatic positions, such as Argentine ambassador to the United Nations in Portugal and Cabo Verde. Thank you very much for being a part of this initiative, Ambassador. Okay, well, let's start now with this dialogue. I'm thrilled to have this opportunity, but I'd like to begin with Dr. Vilma Ibarra and ask her to tell us what are the 2 or 3 factors that led to realizing this proposal of legalizing abortion in Argentina. What kind of obstacles did you encounter, and what strategies did you use to overcome them? Dr. Ibarra, we'd love to hear you. Go ahead. Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me well, and thank you for this invitation. Quickly, to move on to the question you've just asked. First of all, legal, safe, and free abortion as a win or victory is the end of many small victories that have taken place in Argentina. And I'm referring to the law on gender identity, humanitarian, and the law on parity in gender and sexual and reproductive rights, comprehensive sex education, and many others. There was a lot of mobilization of the citizenry, in particular women's organizations, feminist organizations. There was the campaign for the right to legal, safe, and free abortion, had an important role in all of those. And this battle was taken to the streets as well. And we've been very present there in that claim. That's the first part. If there had not been this social demand led by organized women, it would have been much more difficult to get to where we got. A second point, which I also think is highly relevant, is the political decision taken by the national government to take on this claim made by the women to take on the political commitment to put an end to criminalization of abortion and of criminalizing women for an abortion and to legalize the practice until the 14th week of gestation. The fact that the president of the nation in his electoral campaign proposed this allowed us, on the one hand, to make our claim legitimate through a popular vote, because those who were voting for him knew this would be a part of the political agenda in Argentina. And secondly, unlike the frustrating experience of 2018, where we addressed the issue but we couldn't get a law adopted, the very fact that the national executive branch headed the battle meant that we also were able to improve our discussion and debate with the governors, senators, and deputies, because now we had much more political strength behind us. This is also framed by a government that has given an important role to women, but particularly to feminist women. Feminism is now a part and parcel of the government. And we have seen that through the fact that we have a lot of more women in government. The third thing is the mainstreaming. And we believe that without generosity, it is very difficult to reach policy without consensus. We have worked arm in arm with women and men as well, through many different political forces. We have shared information. We have been sincere. We have trusted ourselves as women and trusted each other, and have been able to have our ideological and political differences to not harm the will, the intent that we had. And the last important part of our strategy, and we did not make this as a confrontation with the church or other religions, we proposed it as a strategy to explain that criminalization has led to horrible situations, to the death of hundreds of thousands of women, of harmed health. And we explained over and over again that nobody's been forced into this. And fortunately, the law does not force anybody to go against their beliefs. We have been very respectful of religious beliefs, but we have not been confrontational. We explained the need for public health to sanction this law. If I have 1 second left, I'll talk about the main obstacles, which we knew our main obstacle, unfortunately, in 2020 was the pandemic. So we were very careful and respectful. We understood the difficulties. We knew the fear, the anguish in the people, in the population. And so we did not introduce the project when we had the peak in cases. We waited instead for the number of COVID cases to drop so we could have room for a debate where we could hear the people of Argentina. A second point is that these agreements that we established with the feminists, but also with other sectors of the opposition, allowed us to avoid having this proposed as a confrontation with the government. It was a universal discussion, and that was strategic to get the vote. And the third point was that when we adopted this policy of non-confrontation, we listened to the voices that had the most concern, and together with them, we drafted a law, and we drafted a law to provide comprehensive care to pregnant women and to women in the children in the 2 first years of life, to understand why it's a state commitment that when maternity is elected and chosen, it's a beautiful life plan that should be supported by the state. And so all of this to deal with difficulties and propose a strategy together with the feminists from the opposition, and understanding that this was a common goal with the support of the national executive branch and working with other social organizations is what led to this successful victory. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ibarra, and congratulations, because whenever there's progress achieved, it's a main success, but particularly under a global pandemic. And it's a subject that's always divisive for society. So thank you so much to give us the recipe for success. And we'll talk a bit more about this through the other questions. Let me now give the floor to Marta Alanis, who I hope will now give us her perspective. How, from feminism, what was the evolution, the path taken in the process to bring about these changes? And what did you learn from the process? What was the role of young women in this green wave, which, as I said, has now spread to the rest of the region? Marta, go ahead. Marta, your microphone is mute.
Thank you very much for this invitation. I'm very excited to be here and to share with you the whole process of feminism up to this very successful moment in time. It would be too lengthy, but I must say that as of early 20th century, it was the anarchists who fought in our country for the right to abort. And afterwards, regularly, there were groups that were demanding the right to an abortion. In order to come up with this national campaign for the right to a legal abortion in Argentina, we have to mention the National Women's Meetings, which as of the year 1986, we have convened on a yearly basis in our country, and increasingly more and more women have joined us, where all different issues have been discussed and addressed. And it was in the year 2004 when this movement really takes the right to a legal abortion and launches a campaign, or discusses the launching of a national campaign. But in these national women's meetings, which are extraordinary, an extraordinary place of learning for women, these agreements remain as a mere desire. After a number of failed attempts to launch a campaign, the Catholics for the Right to Choose really launches this major convening to 70 feminist organizations from throughout the country. And the characteristics of our movement is that it is federal and it is present in all throughout the country. So during the first foundational plenary session, we defined that we wanted to see changes in our legislation. We wanted to see the decriminalization and legalization of abortion, because it relates to human rights, public health, social justice, and we defined a slogan: sexual education to decide contraceptive so as not to abort, and legal abortion so as not to die. We decided to develop our own project. Back then, we didn't have so many deputies, so many feminist politicians. Neither did we have Vilma Ibarra. So this heritage of having so many feminists in academia, in our Congress, in the executive branch of power that we see today. In those early years, that was not the case. So we managed to foster a major partnership policy. And increasingly more, we were more. And I want to share with you the fact that this major mobilization that we experienced in 2018, when the former president launches, or more than launches, enables this debate in Congress, he did so, but he was an opposing militant. He was against these political opportunism that sometimes we've had to go through, but we accepted the debate. We went there and we managed a sort of a passing. We welcomed it. There were 1 million women in the streets that day. However, when we went to the Senate of our nation, there were 2 million people. You couldn't walk for many, many blocks surrounding the Senate because of the huge crowds. But we went into the Senate, and this frustration because they turned us down, we managed to turn it into a very strong force that would continue moving forward. And I also have to say that this great mobilization demonstration that occurs has backgrounds. In 2015, when a group of women convenes under the slogan, "Not one less," because of the killing of women, and manages to see these extraordinary demonstrations never seen before in each and every town in our country. Not one less also includes not one less as a result of these clandestine abortions. And we feminists are very generous, recognizing everybody's contributions. And one of the things was that the campaign had people from any political party had to be part of this campaign. The only thing that would convene us all was this struggle, this fight for legal, safe, and free abortion. So how could we go backwards following this demonstration of over 2 million women, where we see the emergence of youth, girls from high schools and from other educational centers? That was something that we had never even dared to consider. When back in 2018, we asked to please that these would be peaceful mobilizations, because if there is something that characterizes feminism in our country, is that always we discuss, we work, we convince, we act, but always these have always been very peaceful actions. And with the ire and the anger of these young women, we managed to contain it, to hit the streets back again and reorganize ourselves to continue with our plight. By the end of 2019, we have the present administration in power, and the president, as Vilma Ibarra said, since his electoral campaign and recognizing that the feminist movement was so strong, the president was convinced that abortion should be decriminalized and legalized. But if he would have not felt the uproar of a mature movement, that is what ended by defining his political will. And then is when we started working in collaboration, not only with the Chamber of Deputies and the Senate, which we had been doing for a long time, but also we met with Vilma Ibarra and people from the Health Ministry and from the Ministry of Women, Gender and Diversity. Sometimes We had different approaches to the timely moment for introducing the project, the Bill of Law, which was resolved thanks to an ongoing dialogue. And it was difficult in my position that I was organizing campaign and friends and colleagues who were also sharing this effort. It was difficult to be able to convince this green wave that the time would come, and it finally did come. And when the Bill of Law was introduced, we celebrated, and it was discussed by our deputies. We also celebrated. We celebrated the law at the Senate, and we were there when it was enacted as well. And I want to say very briefly, if I still have some time, that in terms of lessons learned, the unity of our feminist movement, abortion brought together the overall feminist movement. There were tensions, but there was never a breakdown. Dialogue, patience always was above our differences. This cross-cutting strategy was a proposal of our campaign. Cross-cutting, mainstreaming among different political forces that were grouped within our movement, and discussing with all the political forces, whether in government, or whether in the executive branch of power, in the legislative branch of power. This extraordinary partnership policy of the 70 initial organizations that formed this campaign back in 2018, we counted our partnership again, and we now have a membership or a group of 700 plus. First, parity in both chambers. That was an issue that as a campaign, we did not accomplish as a campaign for the right to illegal abortion, but this reality was key because among the Senate, among our deputies, women voted significantly favoring abortion. Of course, there were gentlemen who supported us and joined us, but our systematic work with the media, within the social media, but with the media, TV, radio, and newspapers, all of a sudden we started talking about patriarchy, feminism, the rights of women, the assassination of women's feminicides, issues that presently, these are issues that are now part of the normal reporting of the media, and it is systematic work of working with journalists, convening meetings, organizing congresses, supporting ourselves mutually, lobbying among parliamentarians to talk with the parliamentarians, to talk with the members of the executive branch, to break away with barriers and this imaginary distances that may exist among us. And of course, we now want to see that the law is applied. We want to strengthen the feminist movement as a hope for politics. We need feminist political cadres in each and every area of our future governments, so that these rights that we have conquered will not be taken aback. Thank you, Martha. And I love this idea of building, supporting, nurturing the feminist movement, which is central to this struggle. I now want to give the floor to Monica de Bol. I know that we have so many questions to Vilma and Marta. I invite you to write them in the chat. We will have a Q&A afterwards, but I want to listen from Monica. From the Brazilian perspective, what is the relationship between authoritarian governments and the reproductive autonomy of women? Brazil and Poland comes to my mind, and primarily from what we've learned from the Argentine women, here is the relationship between citizenship and these movements. Well, thank you very much. For me, it's a great pleasure to be here. I apologize because I will be talking more in Portuñol than in Spanish, but that's the situation. The whole issue of
It's a very serious issue, authoritarianism, and we are seeing enormous effect and repercussion on women and the protection of women, and in the life plan, the life project of women. So the situation that exists today, particularly given the pandemic, is a situation where women, maternal deaths in Brazil, women die twice as much as in the rest of the world from these maternal deaths. And it's a clear reflection of the policies and the manner in which the Bolsonaro government has opposed women's rights in general and the rights of women in particular. The women most affected by these terrible numbers are Black women, women who have very low income. And so this is a huge part of the Brazilian population. And the criminalization of abortion is combined with the Bolsonaro's authoritarianism, the ministers' activities. It makes the situation very risk right now. It's a huge risk. It's actually an obstacle for women's life success. Their girls, for instance, have not received any support. Girls have no support. Pregnant women are not receiving any kind of support. And so it's de facto a very serious situation in terms of the rights and the life plan a woman has. One thing we have been able to do under this extremely difficult context was that last year, Brazil developed a program, and this is a movement that came from society in combination with Congress. It wasn't a government initiative, it was an initiative taken by society. But Brazil has developed the emergency low income program, and it's a very ambitious program, one of the most ambitious in Latin America. It covers about 75 million people, and a large portion of those are women. And it covers, in the benefit, it covers women's head of household who are responsible for their home, their children, or other family depending on them. And those women could get a double benefit. And that helped a great deal to slow down a bit, to hold back a bit, a situation that was already extremely terrible. And that even though this benefit came, we would have had a much worse situation. The situation now in Brazil is that, of course, this benefit has come to an end. And there is discussion in Congress to again pass a law providing it, but discussion has become much more difficult because the leaders in the Senate and Congress are different. They're now leaders that are much more aligned with Bolsonaro. So they are aligned with his policies, his anti-society, anti-human rights policies. And so women's situation overall, and in particular Black and low-income women, are in a critically dangerous situation. We still have criminalization of abortion, and Bolsonaro's one of his policies is, and he said it from the very moment he was in campaign in his election, he said then anything pertaining to human rights, to reproductive rights, to sexual and reproductive rights, all of those issues were considered as key issues in 2018. And yet, when he was elected with that mandate. That's the fact. And for that reason, we see that the situation is very difficult in Brazil for most of society. I don't see any positive thing to this in the near future. There is some groundswell. There's some who are fighting for rights in general, but also the rights of women, of younger children, of black people, or people who need state help. But the situation is extremely difficult at the moment, and there is a lack of coordination, which didn't exist last year. Last year, at least some sectors of civil society had coordinated and organized themselves a bit better. But that's, of course, because the Congress at that time was more in favor of these movements. But the situation has completely changed now. So the society movements are not very organized. Some are still strong, but they don't have much influence on Congress. So it's a constant battle. Right now in Brazil, the big battle is to guarantee the rights of women, that we have the low income emergency assistance once again, so that people can be given the necessary protection they need, and particularly the women, who are the ones who suffer the most. Right now, the pandemic is at a critical stage in Brazil. There are several areas in the country where the hospitals are overflowing. People are dying. There is no intubation equipment. So people are tied up in hammocks in the hospital because there are no intensive care beds. There's a lack of oxygen. It's an incredibly horrible situation. And it's, of course, impacting women much more, and it's having an impact on young girls. And there will probably a lot of long-term effects that will continue to affect these people. So it's not a good story. It's not a good situation. It's a pleasure for me to be able to be with you here, but unfortunately I will have to leave because I have a problem to resolve at Johns Hopkins, and I won't be able to participate in the debate. But we in Brazil are very far from the situation in Argentina, excuse me. Thank you, Monica. And what you just brought up about maternal mortality, women who are pregnant and get COVID, it deserves a separate webinar because the figures in Brazil are scandalous. Thank you so much for telling us what happens with women's lives in an authoritarian government. All of our solidarity for the Brazilian women, those are fighting in Brazil and in exile. We know that these have been very harsh and difficult years, and we are with you. Now I will move on to Ana Cristina. I'd like to hear from her. What is just cause, causa justa? What is Colombia's perspective? What's the intersection with the various processes? Tell us a bit how this is going on. Thank you very much, Giselle. I prepared an outline, so I'll stick to the time you've asked me to stick to here. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation and this opportunity to have this very necessary debate. And I'd also congratulate the Argentina for the approval of this law. That is the end of a very long and lengthy battle. And I also saw the list of participants, and if I were there in person, I would have already hugged several people warmly. So this nostalgia is important to point out in this kind of conversation. Moving on to the questions, I'd like to go back a bit and say that abortion is perhaps the only issue that involves healthcare that is governed by criminal law. I have been working many years in the right to health, and that's why I make this comment. I say that it's a health need, which is in which criminal law is involved, and we know it could end by terminating a women's life plans and imposing on her forced maternity. All the regulations that we have in the Americas today, with the exception of Canada, include the crime of abortion. In some cases, it's only for certain periods of gestation. Usually, abortion is allowed under extreme circumstances, for instance, when the woman's life is at risk. But in others, there are grounds or indications that allow for abortion under just certain assumptions. For instance, if it's a risk to life or health, if there's been a rape, and some very unusual ones, such as artificial insemination without consent, which is one reason for legal abortion in Colombia, because no women have used this because there's no access to artificial insemination without consent. In other countries, abortion is forbidden even to save the life of a human being, which is a woman. And that's fundamental for me because the baseline on which these legal frameworks are built is the existence of a crime. Colombia belongs to a group of countries where abortion is allowed under certain circumstances based on the Constitutional Tribunal of 1996, and it's perhaps the only one where abortion was recognized as a fundamental right, only limited to 3 circumstances. This is important to keep in mind, this context, because every country has not only its own history of the struggle, but many, many histories to get to this unfair and ineffective criminalization of abortion. And Latin America as a region is typified by having a broad repertoire of social and legal strategies to prevent safe and legal abortion. So before the Argentine law was approved, for instance, in that country, many organizations had worked with the healthcare staff to create situations which would at least ensure access to legal abortion under the existing grounds, using strategies such as tools to disseminate an interpretation of the grounds to ensure that they were consistent with the human rights framework. That was a strategy which I think allows them to have a more fertile grounds for providing access to women to a legal abortion. And that effort is all part of a Latin American tradition of sharing information and strategies amongst women's networks, which occurred at the same time, as Marta said, at the same time that they were trying to bring about a change in the law. That's why I say it was simultaneous. This is the framework in our movement of having strategies that are permeable if applied simultaneously. I would like to mention 3 things that occurred in Argentina that have served as a source of inspiration. First of all was their ability to organize and lead a very broad, diverse public debate, which amongst other things included the Chamber of Deputies during the preceding term when the law was not approved. I had the opportunity of being there. I was invited as an expert, and I could see the high level of the debate, the quality of the arguments that were built up from the pro-rights agenda, and the enormous impact that that debate had on the citizenship and inevitably on the political classes. Second is the strength of social mobilization that took to the streets, as Marta said, huge groups of youth, and not just youth, even I was there in marches in Argentina, all of whom felt that they had rights that they would want to fight for. And this was a force that became a cause and later had a symbol, as Marta said, the green handkerchief. The same handkerchief that the women of the Plaza de Mayo used to wear on their heads in white, symbolizing grief and pain. The women translated into a fist that became the green wave throughout the continent. And third, finally, the change that took place in Argentina has affirmed the concept that the process of decriminalizing abortion, which is really a fight for the control and reproductive freedom of women, to attain full-fledged citizenship. In other words, to be able to be free and equal in determining their life course, as is happening in Brazil, for instance, now. Those are different types of disputes and diverse, and there's no one single formula, one single model. To date, what we have attained has meant that abortion is considered a crime, and the legal systems established exceptions for this crime. And although I have no doubt that governments in power, like in Argentina, reflect a better protection of the autonomy of women because they can protect the bodies up to a few weeks of pregnancy. But it's important to note that some countries are looking, like Colombia, are looking for a different kind of legislation. In February of 2020, and after 16 years of fighting to implement within the framework of our health system, after having played with the democratic laws proposed by the Constitutional Court in 2006, we have now fought for setting up the grounds model. We've understood that this model does not allow all women to exercise the right to abortion, which was created by the court itself. To the contrary, it increases inequalities, and it's a source of huge and many different barriers to access. And it has become worse during COVID, and now that we have migrant women. In fact, it has allowed for significant growth in criminalizing women. That is, for women who don't comply with one of the three grounds. And of course, this always affects the poorest, rural, and younger women. And the crime itself is the structural barrier upon which this they have built the scaffolding that has created barriers to access and stigma and criminalization. So since February, we have established Causa Justa that has more than 150 leaders throughout the country. They're seeking to create a public debate on the ineffectiveness, counterproductivity, and unfairness of the crime of abortion, driving the action of the lawsuit that we have made about it being unconstitutional. And we've asked the court to eliminate that crime so that abortion becomes a matter exclusively regulated in the area of health. The suit has been accepted, and in July we will determine whether Colombia will enter into history for recognizing women's full autonomy of their life plans and reproduction. And if that succeeds, the green wave of force that bore fruit in Colombia years ago and has motivated a lot of young people will be crucial. And since this is a circular story and it's contagious, perhaps the just cause will be a cause that will mobilize, following the green wave, the whole region. Thank you very much. Thank you, Anna. Thank you very much. I hope that happens. I hope that happens. Let me allow some space now for questions. I have several questions now. Vilma, can you tell us why you set the 14 weeks gestation for Argentina? Tell us a bit about that. And this non-confrontation with the church is fabulous, but Argentina is a deeply Catholic country. So how did you do that? Can you teach us how you did that? And for Marta, my question is, I have two questions. One, could you tell us a bit more about the confluence of Not One Less with the campaign of sexual and reproductive health? That is, the fight for nonviolence exists throughout the region, and COVID has demonstrated to us that we're far from being successful in that area. So tell us how you link those two movements. And finally, in the Dominican Republic, colleagues have been fighting for many years. What do you recommend to us when we don't have any clear idea of where you're going? What do you recommend we should do? I will continue to ask questions. Vilma, in 2 or 3 minutes, could you respond first, and then Marta, and then we will try to cover as many questions as possible.
Well, of course. Thank you. Well, there are a lot of people from social movements. I have worked extensively with women's movements and these demonstrations, but I am basically a politician. I've been a national senator, a national deputy, legislator. I worked in the judicial power and also in the private sector. So I would like to be able to contribute the greatest richness from the approach of someone in politics whom somehow are in charge of government, and from the government we have to respond. In Argentina, 11 years ago, we did not have a law, same-sex marriage or gender identity laws, or a law. We didn't have a law making abortion legal until the 14th week of pregnancy. We had criminalization. What happened? We had movements, as Marta explained, which were very, very active. In 2006, I introduced in our Senate, just with my signature, no other senator supported it, a bill to make abortion legal. What happened? Why was it that at some time we managed to move forward and not in others? And I want to go to politics with its good and its bad things. And this is why I say that it is that feminisms in power are so important, because social movements per se, when we become involved, we are the ones who raise our claims, our demands, who contribute this, our strength, our love. And frequently these social movements that have their legitimacies, their pluralities, cannot manage to reach a point of concretion. There's something which is essential, which is that politics will place in the agenda and may have, and that these social demands may be emphatic, and this, for the reproductive and sexual rights of women, we only accomplish it through the different mechanisms. And in this respect, Argentina is essential. It is sine qua non. Without social movements, without the people mobilizing in the streets, without demands, without demanding, without very powerful organizations, we will not accomplish victories. But without politicians who are willing to pay attention, to listen and pay attention, not also. And this is essential to say it, because without our women, without our ministries of women, without feminist women, that this government allowed them a very important position in government, we would not accomplish it. And with this, I go to 14 weeks. It could have been 12 or 18 as in Sweden. We have the experience of Uruguay. It could have been 12. It would have been without any specific terms. I was a national legislator for 10 years. If something I did learn is that one never passes the best law, but the possible law, the law that allows for consensus to move forward. We lost back in 2018. A similar law back in 2018 was not passed. And the National Senate really struck us a very harsh blow. And we have to learn from all of these experiences. We developed a very robust, powerful law. And our demand was that it would be for 12 weeks. We discussed and we debated within government and argued on why it had to be 14. We could not increase it more. And we had to be aware of what was our limit to accomplish these votes, because there was a base of votes that we had already accomplished back in 2018, but we had to obtain more votes because we lost in 2018. This reality of politics and how political systems work with the federal realities, the provinces, the governors that determine the votes of senators, this is something that politics has to be accountable for. If feminist movements cannot be victorious with these political environments, we will never accomplish anything. It was 14 because that is what allowed us to reach this this crossroads between the votes that we had assured and the ones that we needed more. Could have been 18, but we didn't have enough votes. 12, but we preferred to go after 14 because that provides a broadest protection to women. And with each and every other law, same-sex law and gender equity law, of which I was one of its protagonic actors in Congress, and I informed them at the Chamber of Deputies, and I co-authored them. It relates to this that I'm talking about, to be able to bring together and the strength of social demands with political articulation, convincing persuasion. So what is this all about of not being confrontational? No. I'm not saying, I'm just trying to say that if I hit the streets, that my fight is with the church, I lose the votes of a lot of Catholic and evangelical women who also undergo an abortion. I know that the church or the churches can be and are indeed a factor that places roadblocks, but I need to convince and to persuade on why we are right. We are the fairest. We are the ones who bring forth the best possible policies for women, for equality, to ensure, to guarantee their rights. And we launched not a discourse of confrontation, war, and aggression, but a discourse based on rights, to accept and to say that we need women to have their rights guaranteed. We work much more on the basis of rights than on confrontation and aggression, which is something that loses votes for us, votes that we need in order to perform. Thank you very much, Vilma. And Marta? You're muted. You're muted. Please unmute your microphone, Marta. Okay. Could you please repeat the questions? Well, there are questions about how does the campaign of Not One Less relates to the fight for safe and legal abortion and this aggression against women throughout the region. How did you accomplish all that? And to tell us a little bit more about the green wave and how do you approach the relationship with the church, you being part of the Catholics for the Right to Choose movement, well, most specifically, the influence of the campaign Not One Less, which was a movement that emerged and spontaneously convened by a small group of women, most of whom were journalists, given a killing of a woman, and that brought about an never seen before demonstration. This spontaneous demonstration it started to organize itself and to add other issues, not only feminicize, but also to include this clandestine abortion as a crime of the state, because it would not guarantee legal abortion. So women, it was joined by women from all different sectors to the first convening of Not One Less, which was launched on the 3rd of June. And there were women from the middle class, low income groups, young women. It was massive, the demonstration. We, in our earlier demonstration, had not accomplished that. So in including the right to abortion and supporting the right to abortion, this is what moved this major wave for Not One Less would join the green wave for abortions. Not One Less, we know who are the ones who move this movement forward. We remain in contact with them. We know how to collaborate with them. We know each other. We are all activists, militants. We do not compete among ourselves, although we may compete among ourselves in other areas whenever there's a fair, just and fair cause. When the cause is fair and just, we cannot compete. We have to add, contribute. So what really influenced much more among young women. And I want to clarify the whole issue with the green handkerchief. The green handkerchief was my idea. We brought this to the United Nations based on the idea with the Mothers of May and wearing these handkerchiefs on their head, demanding full information about their children. And we related this to our fight for sexual and reproductive rights. And we brought these green handkerchiefs to a national organization of or a conference of women, we selected the color green because it was a color that is related to health and hope, the environment, that that would identify us all. It was a healthy color. And what we never dared to dream was that young people would take this green handkerchief as a matter of identity, because as of the end of the military dictatorship and we started with democracy, the youth did not identify themselves with a specific project. So it doesn't really matter who selected the color or who designed the logo. The logo was defined on the day when we founded the campaign, and the merits that the green handkerchief multiplied itself. It went cross border and became a wave. But those, we never gave any serious thought to all of that at the beginning. At the beginning, it was only a matter that would represent us, that would identify us. The whole Catholic approach, how did you, well, with the church, the work with the church is not monolithic.
Even the Argentine Episcopal Conference is not a monolithic. There are many different views. And we, in general, have a policy of finding common ground. And in abortion, there is no common ground with any of the members of the Episcopal Conference. But in the People's Church, in the Church of the People, we have a lot of believers in the right to abortion and on the right to decide amongst the Catholics for choice. The president of the nation, Alberto Fernandez, said, "I am Catholic, and I believe and I think that abortion is the solution so that women don't resort to clandestine abortions, so they don't die, so as to avoid the complications of unsafe abortion." And that has nothing to do with my religious beliefs. And I think that's the point. We have to make sure that our states are more lay states, allowing people to believe what they want, but the government's obligation, and its obligation is to ensure the common good for the entire population, not just for those who believe in Catholicism or are Muslim or are evangelical. No. And I think that this firm position taken by our president was an implicit call for a separation of church and state, to give greater value to a demand made by the state than to the sexual morality of the church that did not have good results, not even within the church. So it's a significant step moving towards separation of state and church. I'd like to ask 3 more questions so that you can start thinking about it. Marta, what do we tell the Dominican women who say, what do you do with the president can't make up his mind, and thinking about total criminalization? And I'd like to ask you a question about the conquest of the rights. What are the obstacles you foresee in implementing this? Because there always are obstacles. And how do we prepare for this? And Ana Cristina, my question for you is, how did you develop the agenda for this issue in Colombia? Maybe you could start by telling us about this, and then we'll go back to Marta and Vilma. Thank you, Giselle. We've had an excellent dialogue. It's incredible to be able to dialogue virtually. I still need a little bit of human touch, but my congratulations for organizing this. Well, I think there's 3 things that I would highlight in this question. The first, like many others here, we've been militant for many years trying to bring about the issue of abortion. And I say that because I think that accumulation of it, as Vilma said, to combine that with our presence with the politicians, but that does have a value in and of itself when the Constitutional Court in Colombia in 2006 decriminalized abortion for only 3 grounds and said it was a fundamental human right, we said we're going to play with the rules of the game. And for 16 years, we did everything possible we had with all organizations in Colombia to ensure that women could have access to abortion. And we not only did that in Colombia, we spread it throughout Latin America through the interpretation of the grounds with other partners, such as you, Giselle, and IPPF. So that accumulated history understanding allowed us to understand the reality close up and the problem and identify any new issues that had come up in the conversation since the moment of 2006. And I mentioned those briefly. The barriers to access for women in Colombia are increasing, they're huge, and they're becoming more and more acute. The criminalization, instead of it decreasing, criminalizing it, it increased. Because with only those 3 limits, the women that did not fit into that, according to the doctor or the judge, the women are sued and criminalized. So it has actually increased illegal abortion. All of that information allowed us to say, look, there's new issues that have come up for this public debate, and Just Cause, it's a movement which had been developing for 3 years, whose initial purpose was to start a public debate about the issue. And I could see Vilma sitting next to me because part of what we wanted was to make this a public dialogue. But like in politics, there are certain windows of opportunity. Last year, there was a very strong attack from the anti-rights groups to try to stop everything we had achieved in Colombia. And that point in time, with their intent to set us back enormously in Colombia, provided the window of opportunity for us to say, no more, no more. We're going to now present the debate using our terms. We launched this movement, and there was an opportunity at the Constitutional Court because, as I said earlier, we have new arguments now that had not been used in 2006. I already mentioned one, but the other important one is the freedom of profession and job. Doctors who work with a commitment say, we want to do it, but the crime is on our shoulders here, and we want there to be a change. So we did it with these new strategies in mind. We have a strategy that I can't mention here, but there's one thing we do deeply believe in is in educating, getting people to understand why that crime is considered ineffective, counterproductive, and the other things I mentioned earlier. Thank you very much, Ana. Vilma, so much fighting for this law. Now we would like to see it implemented. What are the obstacles you envisage for implementing it? And how do we prepare ourselves for it? Well, 2 points. First, Argentina is a very long, big country and has significant regional differences with different cultures as well, different social, political, historical differences as well. And now the measures to implement this in the hospitals will depend on each one of the provinces. So we know that implementation is not the same in Buenos Aires, in the urban centers, as it is in other sectors that are much more conservative and who have a culture that is much more conservative and more aligned with different thoughts about women. So I would say 2 things. It is a huge challenge for the Ministry of Health as well as the Ministry of Women, who work in a coordinated fashion. And so we need 2 things that the President of the nation has emphasized. Sex education, comprehensive sex education throughout the country in an urgent manner. That's why we included it within the law on legalizing abortion, saying that this was a law, a public law, and it was a requirement that had to be implemented throughout the territory in all provinces. Second, prevention of violence. We have serious problems with femicide, with the harassment and abuse of children and teenage pregnancy are serious problems in our country. And as in all cases, a lot depends on the government of the province and the judicial structures of the provinces. And the third issue is quick access to contraceptives, which is another policy that has to be implemented. So we need to, and we're already doing, taking those that have lost in their votes, who are going to be seeking other kinds of obstacles to prevent, through judges, the law from being implemented. They want measures that should not innovate or not apply the law. So for that, we have set up a whole judicial legal team, and to counter all that. And in conclusion, I'd like to say that these laws, the difficulties we've had in implementing the law, has a lot to do with this history. When we adopted the law of equality in marriage, we did not want it to be called marriage. We wanted it to be called civil union, etc. And the discussion was that it should be the same rights with the same name. What had to do with the symbolic right that marriage is with marriages you could build kingdoms and undo kingdoms and determine inheritance, etc. So therefore, we felt that marriage was the symbol, that lay institution that would break the discipline against diversity. And it was very common. Abortion, maternity as such, has always been part of that concept of marriage. That marriage means women's marriage, taking care of children, whether it's in public or the private area. And so the challenge of this discipline is to understand the autonomy of women. It was not just to achieve the right for women not to die because of a health issue, but also the symbolic fact that they could achieve autonomy and break with this other discipline, which means that those who believe in the patriarchal structure that exists and has been debated, many have said that. They've said, oh, patriarchy is not going to end. And we've said, yes, we are going to put an end to that. So this movement of women, this diverse group of women, has a lot to do with the concept of equality, with breaking privilege cultures and develop culture, methods, and behavior that will break down the mindset of men and many women as well. So we have to understand what it is that we're having to face, what we're dealing with. And that's why it's so important. And I repeat this over and over. Politicians get mad at us because when we get mad, and we're always right when we get mad, but I strongly defend this concept that politics is the only means with which we can change society. Without an active society, without social organizations that make demands, it's impossible. And without a policy that takes on those demands, we can never succeed. That's why the political battle is so important, why we need to understand why we have to have feminist women in government positions, because only there can we ensure that the social demands made by women who are raising their handkerchiefs can become a reality, because we can combine our struggles and coordinate them. And thank you so much for this invitation. For me, it has been a huge learning curve to listen to colleagues from other countries and who have had different experiences, because we always grow together amongst our women's networks by hearing out one another. Thank you. Thank you, Vilma. Marta, what do we say to our colleagues in the Dominican Republic? I've heard different views, and Michael, it's important as a dialogue that we have many, many more questions and time to answer them. So I think we're going to need another dialogue to answer these questions in depth. Marta, go ahead. Well, it's very difficult to give recipes, but I think that we have stages, eras, in which we work very slowly with the base, with our uh, fellow women in the poor neighborhoods in different areas. We had, for instance, Menem's government, where he had a partnership with the Vatican, and we couldn't start up at that point. So when this under such difficult times, you have to work developing an awareness, a consciousness, but you have to end up by changing the government, changing politicians. You have to make women and the people more political. In Brazil, for instance, you can't wait for a fascist government to adhere to rights, nor to a religious government to do that. You have to have a change. The citizenship has to become aware to bring about that change. Abortion is not going to occur under Bolsonaro, nor under those nefarious other politicians that we see in Central America and who are in the Dominican Republic. That's why you have to remain united. And under such difficult times, I mentioned Menem, but also under Macri, what was most important during those eras was the regional networks learn from each other, support one another, learn through seminars, go to UN sessions, UN meetings, be members of a national and regional networks until the moment arises, until we can do it. And then you're ready to do it. And we will support our Dominican sisters. We will give your full support, but we have no recipe. Thank you, Marta. To conclude, it's been a privilege to be with all of you today. I did learn some things that I've taken note of. And I'm glad that there are no recipes, because when you are fighting for something, each scenario is different, each country is different, but we can learn from one another. So the idea of supporting the changing politics and working on the basis of politics is very important. To support feminist movements is also an important point, to cultivate them. And I like this idea of possible laws in this struggle for justice. We do want a perfect law, but we need possible laws. And that means sometimes you have to set back a bit and move forward. And so I support the colleagues that are involved in this struggle. Let me say that you have the support of IPPF WHR in helping you implement this law. We will be behind you at all times. And a word of solidarity for the women in Poland who are out in the streets right now, where they have a long struggle ahead of them. Also the support for the women in Honduras, Salvador, Dominican Republic, who are fighting, where we don't see any light, any possibility of change yet. But keep in mind that the Argentine women are there behind you, and I'll be thrilled to support all of you from IPPF WHR in whatever environment you're working. I now will call on the Ambassador Arguello, and I thank all the partners that have supported us. I see here our colleagues from RFSU Sweden, Ivan Prudencio, Van Maggenson, two dear colleagues who supported us for many years. These struggles always take a long time. And we bet and support a green world and a feminist world. So go ahead, Ambassador Arguello.
Well, thank you very much to you, Giselle, and good morning to all. The first thing that I want to do is to thank you extensively for having joined today's discussion. This is a very important discussion which has been possible thanks to a combined joint effort between the Inter-American Dialogue and the International Federation, Family Planning Federation, Western Hemisphere region. And with these two organizations, the Argentine embassy has felt very comfortable, and we've been able to accomplish our goal, such a very important goal. Together, we have discussed the historical process that is occurring in Argentina in relation to the health and the sexual and reproductive rights of women that has been discussed extensively by our panel of experts. I want to thank this panel for sharing their invaluable ideas and reflections with us, and to say that while the very recent passing by the Argentine Congress of the law that has been analyzed today is indeed both a watershed moment in the promotion of rights of women in Argentina, as well as the outcome of this lengthy struggle of women's movement, I feel important to emphasize that this achievement speaks not only about the past, this is an accomplishment that, above all, speaks about the future. This is the whole idea that is enrooted in President Alberto Fernandez's ideas, which instructed the creation of a Ministry of Women, Gender, and Diversity in December of 2019, parallel to his own inauguration as President of the Republic. This is an extraordinarily important decision in the institutional history of our country. This ministry is a focal tool that will enable us to continue working with our civil society and with other relevant actors in order to create a much more just and fairer country, regardless that will be more beneficial to our population, regardless of whether they are men or women. In spite of all difficulties known to everybody due to the pandemic, Argentina continued to move forward with important achievements such as the creation of the Ministry to mainstream gender policies and the development of policies against gender-related violence and other initiatives. These ratify the a very important commitment of our government to a gender perspective. The government of Argentina will continue supporting gender equity and the rights of women in a multilateral level, both globally and domestically, because there are cases when these matters are not explicitly part of the agenda, as happens, for example, in those fora that address here and everywhere else in the world, those matters that relate specifically to financial, commercial, or economic matters. But this message must also be present there. To conclude, as I've already indicated, the process that we are experiencing in Argentina is about the future, about the determination of our authorities to build a fairer, more just and inclusive society. And this is why I want to once again thank our panelists for helping us to understand all the complexities of this process, which I am sure are a very valuable asset that will allow us to continue moving forward, both us as well as other countries from the region in order to reach their objective. Thank you very much.